The guards were sliced and cut down, blood splattering the scene as the old man watched and looked on in abject horror. He could not believe the sight before him, and he felt like something was amiss. The groans of death surrounded him, and blood was splashed throughout the room as the man detected that something terrible was amiss and the situation was completely out of the ordinary. Unless the old man's eyes were deceiving him, he could see that his young nephew was actually commanding the art of necromancy. The old man's gloved hand moved quickly, gathering as much dark energy as he could into his hand. However, he could not fathom how such a thing had happened. The magic hardened into a purple ball in his hand, and the old man prepared to fight back. He called the apparitions a mockery of the founding patriarch's power, but his nephew did not care, saying that it was not odd for the patriarch of House Marbas to have the ability to command the undead. The old man roared that the situation was preposterous. Necromancy was a long-lost art, buried in the annals of history. Not even the boy's father could make use of it in life. There was no way that the uncle would accept that a useless brat like him would be any different and actually be able to use necromancy. The old man refused to entertain the boy's nonsense. The young lad was still unbothered, and said that if his uncle really found that so hard to believe, then he had no choice but to prove his abilities. His already dark eyes became even darker and menacing. However, Leon warned his uncle that he would not like the results of that choice at all. The goblins in the area grew even more menacing. Their wicked smiles were wide, and they lumbered forward, advancing towards Kirchel. The goblins then raced ahead, eager to slaughter their prey, and the old man amazingly stood his ground. In an interesting display of courage, the man really thought that he could easily fight the goblin warriors that had appeared before him. The old man screamed for the monsters to go back to the abyss and unleashed purple fire right at them. One of the goblins screeched, and it looked like that attack would be effective after all. The goblin's body turned to ash, and its undead form began to crumble. The old man smirked with joy and triumph, relieved to see that he could beat the monsters after all. But he had only taken down one, and it was much too soon to start rejoicing. The fallen zombie's skin began to peel off, and it slowed with odd cracks and pops. However, although the monster had taken some damage, it suddenly rocketed forward with a screech of rage, harmed but not beaten, as it lunged at the Lord Kirchel. The old man was shocked to see that he had not even successfully taken down one monster, and he called for his guards to help him. To the old man's shock, all the guards were at his feet, long since dead. The old man cursed and gathered even more purple magic, flinging it at the boy before him. The goblins easily dodged the attack, now understanding that it could actually harm them. They approached faster, brandishing their sword at the evil old man. The uncle had to admit that his prowess with magic was only marginally superior to a novice, but he yelled that there would be consequences for the boy's betrayal, as if the old man had not planned to betray him first. The old man was further held back by the effects of liquor that he'd soaked himself in that night. He was currently in danger, though he kept yelling that it was not a matter that he would brush aside lightly. While he was talking cheap threats, a goblin leapt up beside him and stabbed him through the chest. This was a huge shock to Kirchel, who had not seen that coming at all. The old man groaned in pain, blood leaking from his wounds, but he could still summon some magic to defend himself. However, the magic had started to flake out and shatter. The man could barely hold his concentration. After all, he was drunk. So, he settled on cheap morals, calling the boy out for daring to turn against his own flesh and blood. The man muttered that the child would never be forgiven. Leon just said that he recalled that he once read a treatise on the continent's history with his father. There were victors and the vanquished, with the cold gaze of hindsight separating the two as time went on. The uncle growled at getting lectured, but there was a lesson to be learned from Leon's words. As devoid of emotions as the young boy was, he imagined that he had yet to fathom its true meaning. However, there was one thing that the child learnt from the book. He had learnt that forgiveness was the privilege of the victor. Now the young lad had walked all the way to his uncle, so that they were now standing nearly side by side. The boy knew that his uncle had once been a victor, once upon a time. He supposed that was what his uncle was when he stabbed his father in the back and made his bid for survival. However, times have changed now. The uncle went purple, growling and telling the child to shut his mouth. However, Sir Kirchel von Marbas would not bid farewell, and his nephew hoped that he would suffer every step of the way. The boy would always cherish this day as the man's day of defeat. As for the man's punishment, Leon would take from him the ambition of seeing another day. The goblins leapt at the man with mad glee, their weapons raised. In the name of the patriarch of House Marbas, Kirchel von Marbas was cut down, and he screamed in agony. His cries were music to Leon's ears. Eventually, the man's hand flopped in defeat, and he was dead. Encouraged by Leon's ire, the goblins kept energetically stabbing and cutting into Kirchel even long after the man had passed away, and the Marbas kitten huffed in amusement. The boy was truly deranged as he had suspected, and he was sure even the devil would be moved by this display. A novice necromancer could suddenly wield that with such skill despite this being his very first time. One might think that the boy had been commanding the undead for a decade already. The boy stared as he considered that statement, and then suddenly thought of something. His face back to malicious glee. He had just come up with a rather amusing idea. An idea that probably only he found amusing, and the Marbas kitten wondered what this terrifying idea might be. The next day, a board meeting was called and all the nobles were present. Well, almost all of them. They were surprised that another meeting of the council had been called so soon. and they asked if anyone knew why Sir Kirchel had summoned them once again. Most of the gathered nobles were clueless and had simply come because they'd been called. It seemed that his little sidekick on the council was yet to arrive as well, so they decided to be patient a little longer. Still, another noble worried that an urgent meeting of the council was no laughing matter. His hands shook, wondering if there was news that House Sylvester meant to break the peace treaty and strike while they were in disarray. This was worrisome news, but another noble said that they would not encourage paranoia within their ranks. The man hardly thought that they would be so brash as to break an agreement between two great houses. Besides, the resumption of war would require an official approval from His Majesty himself. The man supposed that the other noble was right, and in any case, they had to stay put and wait for the council head to return. All their doubts would be cleared as soon as Sir Kirchel became the head of their household. Suddenly, there was the sound of footsteps and the creak of the door opening. The nobles turned to see their young lord appear before them. The boy walked past the nobles in silence as he made his way to his seat, and they whispered amongst each other, alarmed because they had thought that this meeting was called by Sir Kirchel. They did not know why Leon was there, and if he meant to challenge his uncle since he was the rightful heir. They were even shamelessly whispering as if he could not hear them. But even they knew that the cruel old man had no regard for such formalities. However, the nobles could not figure out why the boy was here. Suddenly, Leon glanced at all the men before him, and he asked if they had expected to see his uncle instead. Unfortunately, his uncle would not be joining them for this meeting. To put it more clearly, his uncle would be permanently unable to attend. This made the other nobles rather nervous, and they asked the young lord to clarify. He happily did so, taking his seat as he informed the other nobles that his uncle was dead. They stared at the young boy, horror in their eyes, and he confirmed his words, adding that he had even been the one to put an end to the wicked old man. Now, if that answered their question, he asked if anyone had something to say. Maybe some of them would be interested in joining his uncle. The nobles all stared at him in shock. These guys were confused and knee-deep in disbelief. They could not believe what that man had just said. For a moment, they were speechless. Then one of them slammed his fist on the table, saying that if this news was true, then their Lord Patriarch had to explain himself with more than just a few words. How on earth had the most senior elder of House Marbas died when they had scarcely even mourned the passing of the boy's predecessor? Leon thought that was a very good question, and he had a very good answer for that one, too. The other nobles joined in on the outrage, yelling that the boy may be the Patriarch. But he owed them at least an explanation on matters such as the sudden death of their evil leader. The boy stared at the nobles coldly and declared to them all that Kirchel von Marbas was a traitor to their name. They all flinched because they already knew this. Not only had the evil old man turned against his father and surrendered vital information to their enemies in House Sylvester, but the man had even sought to usurp Leon's rightful place at the head of their clan. Now, the other nobles that had supported the old man were starting to sweat. What the boy did find the most curious, however, was that despite all valid grounds for a summary execution, all the other nobles seemed to defend that horrible old man with such zeal and loyalty. Now the other nobles were really starting to sweat. The call to assemble for a meeting of the house had come under Kirchel's name, yet they had all appeared like he was the head of the house. The old man being nowhere in sight lends credence to the claim that he had been slain. Another noble thought that it was quite foolish of the old man to be murdered by a fresh-faced boy, and other panicking nobles noted that this was not the time to be fretting on Kirchel's behalf. If the young Leon somehow managed to assassinate his uncle without a single soul to do his bidding, then they were all in serious trouble. One of the nobles suddenly leapt to his feet, saying that he never suspected that the awful old man could be planning such an evil thing. He even dramatically cursed Kirch's name for daring to commit such a grave offense. It could be that the boy had come into the possession of some strong magical power, and the brunette noble did not want to face the consequences for that. The blonde noble gulped as well and stood, declaring his innocence on the matter as well. They said that they could not have possibly known what the old weasel was plotting, especially something that dastardly. However, the young boy just tapped on the desk in front of him, his eyes dark and threatening. He told them all to be silent. Their claims of innocence and ignorance could be true, but that would nonetheless render them all guilty of a grave crime. They had all been rather negligent for failing to uncover the traitor among their household. The nobles cursed internally about getting baited by Leon, and they'd fallen into his trap. Another noble agreed with the young lord, but he did want to know whether Sir Kirchel was a traitor or not. The noble asked if there was proof of the claim. After all, who was to say that their young lord had not slain an innocent man? The young boy heard the noble out, and then he suddenly got to his feet, saying that they all acted precisely as foreseen by one far more discerning than himself. The other nobles wondered who they could be, but they could not see Marbas seated cheekily on the boy's shoulder. So, that was not their business and they would have to stew in their ignorance. Instead, the boy glanced at them, his eyes dark and malicious. If his nobles wanted proof, then he would provide them with proof. The young lad opened the great book of Necromancy and said that they should allow him to demonstrate the betrayal of Kirchel von Marbas. A dark aura swept through the council room, taking all the nobles by surprise and fear. Leon was the trueborn son of House Marbas, and he called forth the name of the damned soul that wandered the realm. Sure enough, from the pits of the underworld, his cackling goblin squad rose with their weapons braced on their shoulders. The other goblins fell out, cackling and laughing as they pulled up in their squad. The book poured out the undead under Leon's control like they were water, and the other nobles watched in horror as the boy used the spell to summon the undead. They could not believe a boy this young could do something like that. Then, from the depths of the underworld, Kirchel von Marbas rose. The man's clothes were tattered and torn, and he cracked his way to the surface. Somehow, the boy Leon had discovered the forgotten magic of the Marbas house, and the nobles stared in horror to see the undead body of Kirchel von Marbas. The boy asked his noble uncle to confess his crimes with whatever remained of his mind. The nobles were absolutely shocked to see the old man in the state that he was now in. They could not believe that this was possible, and the young lad sighed that he was starting to tire of hearing that same question over and over again. He did not think it should be so shocking to see a necromancer from House Marbas when the very foundation of their house was built on necromancy. The goblins screeched with glee as they charged forward, and one noble yelled for everyone to flee for their lives. They truly were terrified, and one noble yelled for the other to make haste. However, they had barely started to run before the noble lost his head. The other noble stumbled back, horrified to see his colleague now missing a head. The shaken brunette turned, a nervous sweat gathering on his brow as he saw the blonde noble begging for mercy. His legs had been cut off, and the man groveled in pain. However, his eyes widened in horror as the young Leon stepped in front of him. The boy said that the meeting was not quite done yet, so none of the nobles were allowed to leave. They would do well to heed their patriarch until he had nothing left to say. With that, the undead uncle marched his disgusting way to the other nobles, his body cracking and crunching with each step he took. The old man was clearly not very fit, and his nephew said that he would ask Kirchel von Marbas if there was a single soul among those present who had no knowledge of their vile deeds. The old man looked at the cowering nobles with his dead eyes, and he confessed that all those who served the last patriarch of their house were turned against him, down to the last man. Not a single man present was ignorant of the uncle's evil ways. That was all that the young boy needed to hear. The nobles cried out in fear and anguish, asking for the young lad to forgive them. They all cried, saying that they would confess to their crimes, and they begged for a chance to prove their loyalty. But these were all men who had led to the young boy being forced to execute his own father. The boy had no mercy for them, and one by one, they were all cut down. Leon watched all the nobles fall and then realized something. By the power vested in him, Leon von Marbas, he therefore proclaimed before the council as he raised his book, that the dark art of necromancy had been restored to the House Marbas. The boy stood over the corpses of those who had plotted and seen to the death of his father. Staring at the room with dead and empty eyes, the man wondered where on earth Sir Pullen had gone. A shaky brunette popped up from the back and explained that the noble Sir Pullen had been cast into the dungeons below on the charge of sedition. So, the dark-haired boy asked the servant to lead the way. The shaky man hopped right to fulfilling his lord's wishes without any hesitation as he was in no hurry to join the others on the chopping block. The dark-haired boy halted when he came before the door, recalling something. Then he said that the rest may choose to flee if it pleases them. The other maids and servants cowered on the floor, in shock at the slaughter that they had just beheld. The young Lord of Marbas warned that he could not be held accountable for what would happen next if they chose to stay. For all of their sakes, he would trust that they would make the prudent choice. With that, the boy left the meeting room, leaving the servants and guards in shocked and terrified silence. Meanwhile, a door creaked open as someone appeared before the Lord of Sylvester. The man greeted his Lord Patriarch before announcing that a letter had just arrived for the man. The Sylvester Lord took the letter and checked out its contents. As the man read with dubious curiosity, his face then morphed to a very amused and very wicked smirk. It was excellent news, and it seemed that even the imperial household was ready to turn its back on the House Marbas. It was only a matter of time that such a thing would happen. After all, outside their progenitor, the house never had much to show for their inflated renown. The little that they had in capital and manpower was also rather laughable. The Lord of Sylvester agreed, saying that they possessed even less of the former than the latter. In any case, the man would proceed as planned for now. The House Marbas would be brought to its knees at last with the War of Noble Houses due to take place next month. Their enemy was sure of it. Then, the Lord asked if his man was up to the task, and the dark-haired man replied that he was ready beyond a shadow of a doubt. There was no chance of their defeat, unless a full-fledged necromancer was to somehow happen to grace the House of Marbas after centuries of mediocrity, or their founding patriarch Wellen von Marbas suddenly returned from the grave. With no chance of either of those two happening, the odds of House Sylvester losing were negligible at most. The man with the mustache smiled, and then said that this war was entirely theirs to win. Meanwhile, in the dungeons of the Marbas home, Sir Pullen cried out and bowed deeply to the young lord, thrilled to see him. He asked for the forgiveness of the young boy, saying that he should not have allowed Kirchel's dark ambitions to fester without his notice, to the point that he cast the young boy in mortal danger. The noble groveled, saying that he deserved nothing short of death, and the nervous manservant was scared of getting a round two of the upstairs show. The boy with the empty eyes regarded Sir Pullen. The man was one of the few loyal vassals left in House Marbas, and the only one to openly oppose his uncle. The sobbing man was someone that the boy had to recruit at all costs, so he told the man to rise. There was still much work to be done and the boy needed the man's services. The noble was surprised, asking the young boy what he wanted with a wretch like him, and the man did indeed look wretched in the moment. Even the boy had to stop to consider how messed up the noble looked after a night in the dungeon. So, first things first, the man had to go take a bath and then meet the boy later in the patriarch's office. There, they would discuss the details of a new line of government. The nobleman was thrilled, saying that the young boy had his eternal gratitude. The man pledged to serve the young lad with everlasting fealty. So, the boy departed and now looked out of his grand gigantic windows, because, Lord forbid, a house has normal-sized windows. The kitten demon hopped on the boy's shoulders and licked his paw in satisfaction. He then asked what the boy would do next now that he had achieved a decent amount of vengeance. Even the young Marba's lord had to ponder that for a bit. The choice was Leon's and they took some time to ponder a bit more. After a bath, Sir Pullen pulled up, and the man flinched, saying that he thought it was quite perilous to make contact with the Sylvesters while impersonating Kirchhoff. It would take an extraordinary performance to feign the man's demeanor convincingly, as he was a very nasty man. Leon already had an idea on how to go about that with a swoosh. He summoned a rather odd-looking demon. It was a monster that began to blend its face as it appeared, taking on the body of his uncle, a rather fearfully convincing appearance. The demon uncle loomed over Sir Pullen quite menacingly, and the man could not help but acknowledge that it was a rather convincing and terrifying appearance, an unholy miracle. The mustache man wondered how the Lord Patriarch could be so nonchalant about the entire affair of being able to raise the undead. What was more, the boy had even made an undead minion of his own uncle. The vassal had been as much as the other vassals, but the boy truly was beyond comparison. Sir Pullen cried tears of joy, beaming that the boy had somehow mastered the art of necromancy. He was like a proud father, and the young lad agreed that he had indeed learnt the art of necromancy. In House Marba's heyday, the young Leon could have laid claim to all that he desired as a true necromancer. It was so cruel that their house had been so unfortunate over the years. The mustache vassal cleared his throat, saying that, naturally, commanding Kirchhoff in his undead form might allow the boy to fool House Sylvester for a time, but they would eventually see through the ruse sooner or later. The undead had no way to recreate handwriting, behavior, or even a manner of speech, and this would be difficult when they confronted people who knew Kirchhoff well. The young Leon agreed that such a situation could present such difficulty, except that the apparition that he had manifested was not an undead created from Kirchhoff's cadaver. The creature that stood before them was merely the undead form of a doppelganger that the boy had somehow happened to find, just lying on the ground. That kind of thing. It was a monster capable of replicating a person's appearance, living memory, and even their abilities to an extent. The fake Kirchhoff even manifested the old man's ghost flames just to prove that point, and the mustache man stared in amazement. The young boy was silent for a bit as he recalled killing the doppelganger and watching the last light go out. The boy had panted, leaning down as he took in the corpse of the fallen woman. He had then asked if the monster had a name. Marbas had explained that she was a doppelganger. It had the power to partially copy a victim's appearance, memory, and abilities, a very unique kind of monster. It was a foul creature that liked to mimic a traveler who was lost or lagging behind, and it would ultimately murder the original and even devour the rest of the victim's companions. The boy pondered such a useful beast, and the demon had chuckled in amusement, giggling that the apple didn't fall far from the tree. Well, after all, Leon had indeed made the decision to claim the doppelganger among his ranks, and he yanked her to her feet. Marbas grinned as he watched this, saying that it was rather kind of the progenitor to leave behind his most previous minion for his precious descendant. This is it from me for this episode. I know the episodes are a bit shorter, but I hope I'm making up for it with frequent uploads. I might upload it as a compilation soon with the next part, so it may reach to those who prefer longer videos in a single sitting. In any case, I now need to go and get my address registered at the local municipal office in Japan, so please wish me luck with all these procedures and more. The quicker all of this is taken care of, the sooner I'll be able to upload more regularly. Until next time.